Great to have such a diverse and talented group of people on this panel today. And you know, the purpose of this is to just sort of share some ideas, some challenges that we're having with ALS drug development. As I mentioned in my last talk, I mean, drug development is what gives me, and I would imagine most of the people who are out there living with or working in the ALS field, the most hope. And so let me now ask each one of you to introduce yourselves to the audience. And I'm going to start with Andrea Pete. Andrea, it's great to see you in between television and movie appearances.
Yeah. My name is Andrea Pete. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I was diagnosed with ALS in 2014 and at the age of 33, and I decided to use my remaining time to raise money to get closer to a cure. And I've been lucky enough to have a slow progression. So I'm also trying to become the first person with ALS to do a marathon in all 50 states on a recovered track. And so I have a marathon number 28 this weekend.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all your advocacy and fundraising and participation in research. It's just been such an inspiration. How did your appearance on the nationally televised doctor show today go?
I think it was good. Bringing hopefully inspiration and raising awareness any way we can.
Great. Thank you. And next we have Dr. Volkan Granit.
Hi there, I'm Volkan Granit. I'm at the University of Miami. I am the medical director of the ALS clinic here. I also participate in research. So I've spent 50% of my time or so in clinical research and 50% with my patients, and also teach our fellows and residents as the associate fellowship director.
Great, welcome. Next, we have Dr. Michelle Manuel from Amylyx.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Michelle Manuel. I am the Global Head of Medical Affairs for Amylyx Pharmaceuticals, and it's a pleasure to join this group today. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Dr. Glenn Frick from Alexion.
Yes, hi. I'm going to apologize up front that I'm on my phone. I wasn't able to get Ring Central working. So if you're having trouble hearing me, just let me know. So I'm an executive medical director. I'm a physician. I'm overseeing the ALS clinical development program at Alexion and overseeing the ALS 308 clinical trial that is currently ongoing. So thank you.
Well, Glenn, I have to say I've seen a lot of Zoom backgrounds in the last year, but I've never seen a giant saw. Oh no, it's a tractor. I thought it was some sort of giant saw behind you.
No, it's a tractor.
All right, next we have Scott Braver from Apellis.
Hi everyone, Scott Braver. So I am the senior director here at Apellis Pharmaceuticals, a small biotechnology company from Boston. Very grateful to be here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Scott. And then Patricia Allegra from Cytokinetics.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My real name is Patricia, but I go by Tita. I work at Cytokinetics, where I'm responsible for reldesemtiv, the drug that we are developing in ALS, and I'm responsible for new product planning and marketing activities. So I'm probably the only non-doctor in the panel.
Well, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
So I've been asked to read a few ground rules. The first one is this is going to just be a discussion of our thoughts. Nobody on this panel is offering any medical advice. Second, we want to make sure that everybody gets to be heard, because one of the most important things I want to do today is help us all to understand the drug development process from all the different perspectives. you know, the perspective of a patient, the perspective of a clinician, and the perspective of pharma. I'll say if you're not actively sharing, please mute your computer so we can minimize the background noise. And I will be sure to give each of you an opportunity to answer any question that you want to answer. So after I ask a question, I'll just kind of go down the list. So let me start with one that I hope will be give us some insights into your views. Tell me what you think are the biggest challenges in ALS drug development that we're facing right now from your perspective. Andrea, I'll start off with you.
Obviously, qualifying for a clinical trial is the biggest impediment. I was self-qualifying a long time ago, and I am grateful to people like Dr. Bedlack who are trying to include all different types of ALS patients, and I also try to participate in research studies, but yeah, I mean, that's an obvious one.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, and I would also say along those same lines, not only are the studies we have difficult to qualify for, but there's not nearly enough studies. And that's, you know, some of the work that you've done has helped us to bring some more studies, some more opportunities to the clinic. Dr. Granite, how about you?
Okay, so for me, the challenges are a few. I mean, I would say first and foremost, we think we're learning this disease more and more, but we still don't seem to understand the biology. We have a lot of, you know, as you, in your earlier talk, you said genetics, environment, is it inflammation? Is it immune system? Is it the gut? And somehow the abnormal proteins start folding, and then we start treating those downstream effects. That's number one. Number two, we start treating things late, like once the disease starts. Not only the disease process probably starts way before the person has symptoms, and then, as you mentioned, about a year of delay in average in our people reaching, you know, our clinics and research opportunity. This is like strengthening a building after a hurricane. So that's another problem. I would say the other thing is not enough participation in research, as you mentioned, inclusion criteria, or being the fear of being a quote unquote guinea pig. But I think that's, at least in our clinic, I feel that that's fast changing. And sometimes I wonder soon if we're gonna have enough space for all our patients in the studies, given the limited amount of doctors and coordinators available. So that's my broader answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, you bring up a good point about you know, resources at the sites. Yeah, I mean, I think for the first time we're starting to see that we need more of everything. We need more doctors, we need more coordinators, we need more exam rooms, because there's so many exciting things happening, and those are challenges that maybe not everyone thinks of. You know, the resources at each site. And Dr. Manuel.
I have to remember to get off mute. Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a couple of challenges that, and you've already hit on them. Number one is competition for clinical trials. So thankfully, there are a lot of trials going on and even more opening up for ALS. So being able to compete for patients at the sites like Dr. Granite's and yours. I think also, and Andrea, you hit on this, that the criteria to enter a trial are often narrow, but the disease is extremely heterogeneous. So if you do a trial in a narrow population, then you have the data, but then the question remains, does this work in the rest of the population? So that is a challenge and a balancing act that I think we have to address.
Excellent. How about you, Dr. Frick?
Yeah, so I think a great challenge that we are faced with in all of neurodegeneration, which includes Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, Huntington's, ALS, is that our animal models for these diseases don't necessarily translate well into human disease. And so what I've heard people say, interestingly, is that we've cured a lot of Mouseheimers in terms of Alzheimer's disease, but we still don't have approved drugs for Alzheimer's, the same as we don't for ALS. And so we've got transgenic mouse, SOD1 mouse studies, mouse lines that we can study the disease in, but often successes in those animal models they have not translated into the clinic. And it's been many years that we've been working on these models. And so that is a very great challenge that we are faced with, because those types of, to translate into the wider heterogeneous population is difficult to do if we don't really understand in our animal models what the true pathogenesis of these diseases are.
Excellent. Scott?
Yeah, I'll pick up on the pathogenesis, because I think from your presentation, Dr. Bedlack, that's something that I'm always struck with is, right now there's 10, and there's probably going to be 20 or 30 in the coming years of underlying pathogenesis. So it's, what do you actually target and when? And I think how you do it is going to be important. And I think that becomes a big issue when we start talking about the type of population that we're actually trying to study. I think that makes it even more difficult. So the second part of that is, what endpoints are we actually going to be using to really understand what is a particular response when we start stratifying out what the pathogenesis ultimately is. I think those are, to me, the two biggest challenges as we get to the next phase.
Great. And Tita?
So I think many of the comments that have been made are so relevant. In particular, I want to reflect on what Andrea and Michelle touched on, which is, the heterogeneity of the disease, the different rates of progressions leading to obviously very specific inclusion criteria. Of course, companies want to see an effect as soon as possible for everyone involved. But at the end of the day, you pay that price later on with market access authorities, which will not like, to see very strict inclusion criteria. So there is this, the issues and the challenges are not just in drug development, but throughout the continuum. And so preclinical, clinical, but also regulatory and ultimately market access. Then I think there is a big issue in my mind that has to do with the meaningfulness of the current outcome measures. I mean, here you have the ALSRESEARCH, the gold standard recognized by regulators, but what does it really mean to patients? And the drawbacks and the limitations are very noteworthy, but we have been talking about the limitations of the scale for years, Dr. Bedlack, and I wish, we collectively, industry, key opinion leader like yourselves, and certainly patients would get together to develop, more clinically meaningful measures. And that affects also, like the quality of life scales, for instance, those that, some market access authorities want to, calculate cost and cost effectiveness are not the ones that are sensitive enough to capture quality of life for patients. And those scales like the ALSAC 40 that have, greater sensitivity are not liked again by the market access authorities. So there are all the stakeholders that I also think have to come together in, aligning as well.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So there's a lot of questions, as I expected there would be, about expanded access. It's definitely a super hot topic right now. And, we're starting to see more of it. I think the next few years we'll see even more. But I was hoping that I would get each one of you to just sort of touch on, is it important? Is expanded access important to you? And what do you see from your perspective as some of the challenges to making it more widespread? So Tita, since I called on you last and you had to come up with something no one else has said, I'll work my way up this time. So go ahead, you start.
Okay. So the most difficult question, right? Look, it's really, I think, the most significant challenge we're facing right now. I understand patients don't have time to wait for trials to be completed. And on the other hand, the conflict resides, like you said, Dr. Bedlack, first of all, some companies, like the one I work at, is a very small company. And so we have obviously to prioritize resources for the conduct of clinical trials. Second, the issue is, the concern that you have by, having access to drugs that you yourself don't know if they're going to be safe and effective. And so the principle of do not do harm is something that, we're all very attuned to. So it's a real conflict, and I wish I could provide an answer that, could state a very firm position, but I don't have that answer.
Yeah. How about you, Scott? You got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, hardest question of all the questions that we received. And I think definitely agree that it's not easy to kind of wrap your mind around. I've done a lot of work into this and trying to work with the community. And my kind of ultimate perspective is that we really need to come together as a community and provide guidance on how we should do this together. So you talked a little bit about in your presentation of what the different mechanisms are, but if you talk to yourself and 4 other clinicians, and then even people living with the disease, what is the right time to actually start a program? What do you want to see for information to make you feel comfortable to do this for resources? I feel like we have a lot of work within the community to do that together, and we owe it to ourselves to do it together versus one company going this way, another company going that way. I think that causes for lots of confusion that admittedly I think a lot of us see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's well said.
Yeah.
Dr. Frick?
Yeah, so as our previous 2 speakers here have said, this is a very difficult subject, and we treat this very carefully and discuss this a lot internally, as well as discussing it externally. So we've actually, in discussions about early access, we've involved an ethics committee, which we've met with multiple times to talk about the issues around providing access to patients. We speak with patient advocacy groups as well. So we try to involve all the stakeholders. And there's some very important issues here. And one of them, we've seen all this happen recently with the Biogen experience. And I think one of the points that may have been, more subtle points that have been missed in the Biogen experience is that, we're running a blinded controlled study with a placebo arm. And so we have patients who have committed to our study, been enrolled, who are on placebo treatment for 50 weeks. And it's blinded, right? So no one knows whether or not they're receiving placebo treatment. We fully enrolled our study. Is it entirely fair and equitable to people who have committed to that and may be on placebo to have other people who can come along subsequent to that and be enrolled in the study, and be enrolled in an EAP and receive treatment while those patients are still on placebo? And we've had these difficult conversations with ethics committees, and it's an important thing to consider. And Biogen did make that point that they will not start enrolling in their EAP until their last placebo patient is out of the study, which I think is in all fairness to other people to those people who are in the study.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, some of the reasons that companies don't offer expanded access are maybe a little bit easier for us all to understand than others. Like certainly the size of the company and the resources. If you don't have enough drug, you don't have enough drug. But, the one that you just mentioned, it may be a little harder for some people to understand that. And the reason is, if that were true, if that was really, something that was not fair, then there never would be any expanded access running alongside any placebo-controlled trial. And there clearly are many examples of where that's happened in HIV and cancer, and even now, in the Healy trial, it's going to run alongside a trial where some people are getting placebo. And, there's the ethical side of it. There's the side of it that people worry about, is it going to harm the trial? But the reality is, I'm not aware of any evidence that an expanded access program ever did harm the enrollment in a trial, or cause the FDA to become concerned about a safety event and pull the plug on the company's ability to develop the drug. So I appreciate you taking the time to explain that. I do think that one is a little bit more subjective and probably more controversial.
Mm-hmm.
But, ultimately, I think one of the things we all have to remember is that the drugs are owned by the companies. They're not owned by society. I don't own the drugs. So if a company meets with ethicists and decides that that's the path they want to go down, we have to respect it. It's your property. So, Michelle, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I certainly do. You mentioned that it's a very hot topic, and I think it's really important to have conversations like this so that there's better understanding across all the different stakeholders. At Amylyx, our mission is to get our drug for ALS approved and into patients' hands as soon as possible, and to as many people who can take it, to make it available to them. And you mentioned resources. We are a small company, and we just announced this morning at the NCALS meeting and through a press release that we're starting a 600 patient randomized controlled study of our drug in people living with ALS, both in Europe and the United States. And so we have to resource that first in order to move that forward. However, I would say that it's also a really important point is that we are working with the FDA to fully understand how we can continue to develop our drug and seek approval, but also offer some form of expanded access. So those conversations are ongoing for us, but it will take us some time to figure that out. But I think all of these points are really important. It is the hardest thing that we do, is because we know that ALS patients, they don't have time to wait. And so we work every day to try to accelerate access for them.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So Richard, can I just add back in also, and you had raised this in your presentation about the use of historical controls in clinical trials, and certainly this potential, this issue around that I just raised and we're talking about now could be addressed by the use of historical control. If we're able to use historical controls, and we have access to databases such as the PROACT database, where we can see from placebo patients who've been enrolled in studies, what the expected decline rates of various groups of patients might be, and use those historical controls rather than actually subjecting patients to being a control for up to a year, as will happen in the Amylyx study and as is the case in our study, where they're on blinded treatment for a year in a disease which we know is fatal in the short term.
Yeah. Yeah, the challenge is, convincing regulators about the utility of historical controls. I don't think we're there yet, unfortunately, but hopefully in the future, we'll be able to do more trials that way. Volkan, I wanted to hear from you. Sometimes when we talk about expanded access, it's surprising for patients and families to hear that not all physicians would be supportive of a request for expanded access. Do you have any thoughts on, why this might be challenging for a physician?
Yes, I definitely do. So I did once my own expanded access for an unapproved drug, and the work that it required that I had to put on was many, many tens of hours. And, in an environment where we are under pressure to do more clinical trials, see more patients, and do more administrative work, that time is not academically or financially compensated. And there is much more push to do a clinical trial than to doing an expanded access program. We just really, I think this is not unique to our institution. For many institutions, as we mentioned earlier, staffing is incredibly difficult. An expanded access program still requires an IRB, still requires probably a coordinator, unless the doctor do the paperwork themselves. It's still reporting to FDA, still dealing with side effects. It's quite difficult, I think. And then it doesn't provide the data unless there's a clinical trials that are well run in parallel to it, as we said, for the future patients. So I think the clinical trials, for a broad perspective, for an individual perspective, having access to a drug is key importance. But if we think as the population, we do the best service by favoring clinical trials over expanded access. If we have adequate resources for both, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, a few years back, I did a survey of neuromuscular neurologists just to sort of get their ideas. I think we had 75 people respond, and many of them were, experienced ALS experts that were working in big clinics like ours. And I was surprised that a high percentage of folks were not supportive of expanded access. And then I kind of looked at some of the reasons why. And like you, I actually participated in one expanded access. I got one person, one thing. And I started to understand some of the concerns. It took me about 5 hours to get one dose of one thing for one patient. And although that doesn't sound like much, when you start to think about the fact that I follow 430 patients, if they all tomorrow sent me an email and said, I wanted expanded access for this, that, or the other thing, how am I going to find the time to do all that? This is, I think it's a challenge that many of us did not really fully understand until we started dipping our feet in this. But clinical trials come with a budget that pays for all the people that we need to help us do things, like the expanded access program I participated in, I found out that I actually had to schedule the patient. I had to check the patient in, I had to do their vitals, I had to do their medicine reconciliation. When it was time to give them the experimental medicine, I had to get in my car, drive across the campus to the experimental pharmacy, sign the experimental drug out, bring it back, give it to the patient, monitor them. It was pretty much an entire afternoon to give one person one thing. And as you said, all of us have bosses and we're under pressure to at least be revenue neutral every half day that we work. So you can quickly see how this becomes difficult unless there are grants like the ALS grant, or there become pots of money like those two bills that are in front of the House and Senate would establish some funding for people that wanted to do this, to maybe be able to hire some of the folks that we need to do it properly at our sites. So I think we're finally at least starting to understand some of this. But Andrew, I wanted to finish with you. I mean, what are your thoughts about expanded access? Is this something that is interesting to you? What do you think about some of the arguments that we've talked about today, the barriers from the physician and the industry side of it?
I mean, I get it. It makes a lot of sense. I would just encourage all of the industry to involve us as patients. We can be your advocates with our regulators. We can help you with trial design. And, I think that we're coming in to this with so much baggage, we're dealing with so much, but there are so many talented people with ALS who would want to bring their resources and their time to helping to figure out this thorny issue. And so I would just keep the channel open and look for ways to involve patients.
Very well said. Thank you. Yeah, and you kind of bring up the next topic that I wanted to talk about, which is patient engagement. You've become an amazing advocate. You've talked about some of the work that you've done, but I wanted to ask some of the other folks on this call, whether they share our enthusiasm for patient engagement, what sorts of things, they're working on to make sure that patients have a voice in the development of drugs that their company or their institution is working on. And I would also ask, if some of you have been considering expanded access programs and you've been meeting with, people like ethicists, do you ever meet with people like ALS to get their thoughts on whether it's ethical to run an expanded access program in parallel with the placebo-controlled trial? Because I think they might have a different opinion on that topic compared to an ethicist. But let me start with Vulcan. Vulcan, what are you up to as far as trying to make sure your patients have opportunities to influence research?
Well, so in our multidisciplinary clinic, we have our patients see, for instance, our physical therapist, occupational therapist, and someone from our research team who knows all our studies that are running. So every person is presented with all the studies that are ongoing at every visit. And not only are these clinical trials, but also observational studies. Now, while observational studies do not provide directly a benefit to the participating person, understanding this disease down the road is the key to treating this disease. As we said, we don't know the biology, but we best understand the biology by collecting biomarkers from spinal fluid and blood and whatever we can get our hands to. So we try to reach out to every person, participate in some sort of research. That's what I think our purpose has been in our clinic.
Great. How about you, Michelle? I know your company's done some work with patient advocates. You want to tell us about that?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, we definitely have done a great deal of work with patient advocates. We started our own patient advisory council where we have 4 patients living with ALS and 4 caregivers who we engage regularly to talk about many things, including the trial designs, and we will talk with them about our expanded access plans, et cetera. We also, as we were planning the Phoenix trial that was just announced today, we engaged the International Alliance for NMD. We also engaged IMALS, who has a committee that looks at that, as well as speaking with other patients about it. So we sought out their input and asked about their feedback on the trial and incorporated it.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Glenn, is Alexion working with any patient advocates on any of its trial or expanded access plans?
Yeah, so we actually do have a very active patient advocacy group that works within Alexion that is in contact with all the same advocacy groups, including the IMALS group, and we work with them, meet with them. As I said, we have an ethics committee that meets regularly to discuss all these types of issues. And so we've participated in a number of these patient advocacy seminars and symposia, and we're always listening to the feedback when we design our studies. There was an active review at the time the study was designed that included patient advocacy, so that we made sure that we were listening to patients and including their voices in our clinical trial designs.
Great. Scott, how about at Apellis?
Yeah, we do. And so we have an amazing patient advocacy group here, and they have started a steering committee that will have people living with ALS as part of that committee, that will have an equal voice to our clinician steering committee. Ultimately, what we're hoping to do is use the patient-focused drug development process that we've all bought into to really not only go for the clinical studies, but what pieces of data are the community really going to need in the future that is independent of the study that all groups will be a part of.
Fabulous. And last but not least, Tita, what do you think?
Well, it's we also very engage with patients and patient advocacy groups, both in the US and in Europe. We also have a patient advisory council, and really, like the head of our patient advocacy group always says, patients are our North Star. And it's really something that we all reflect on this, throughout our day-to-day activities. Again, looking at the continuum and along the different steps that you have to take as you transition a drug from one stage to the other, and from clinical to marketing and to market access. Along the way, we always ask ourselves the question, what can we learn from the patients and their caregivers? And inevitably, from input to the clinical trial or input on an educational campaign, they always bring so many different aspects that we had neglected to think of, or that we didn't imagine to be so relevant and important. So I think you cannot proceed without being guided by this North Star. And very grateful that the ALS patients are so involved and willing to give their input, because with the challenges that they're facing in the day-to-day life, to find the time to provide us with input and guidance is remarkable.
I appreciate that. I see that we're almost out of time. We've at least touched on most of the questions and comments that we've gotten, but I just wanted to ask each person on the panel, if you had to leave, a person that was listening today with one message, what would it be? Tita, go ahead.
Keep fighting, keep inspiring us, not just inspiring us as an industry, but inspiring us as individuals. Your courage and your relentlessness and your resilience are, I think, the reason why many of us have chosen to work in this field. And we're very grateful to you for that.
Scott?
Yeah, everything about you do every day drives me personally, so keep it up.
Glenn?
Working in the field of ALS is different than working in other neurodegenerative areas. The sense of urgency in this field it's so dire that I think all of us really take a very personal position in doing the best that we can and trying to do it as quickly as possible, and being as conscientious about everything that we do in this to try to bring this whole field to fruition in the very near future. So just believe in us, because we believe in you, and hopefully we'll all get there together.
Michelle?
Yes, just thank you for inspiring us every day. Please know that we want to be connected to you, and we're here working for you every day.
Vulcan?
So I think most people, like everybody in this panel and outside in the ALS field, people really dedicate their lives or helping our patients living with ALS. We're here for you. And I think we can best help with everybody participating in research and helping us learning more, so we can give back by doing the best research and developing the best drugs as soon as possible.
And Andrea?
I would just say that every case of ALS is different. You never know what your progression will look like, and just go out and live your life to the fullest, and I appreciate every day.
Thank you. And I'll just say two final phrases. Again, just reminding everyone of those quotes that stick with me every day. You know, nothing about us should be done without us. I hope that everyone listening, remembers those words, because I feel like patients should be involved in everything in the ALS space. As someone wrote here, no one has more skin in the game than they do. So, I mean, I hope that, in the future, scientific meetings are open to patients, and patients have an opportunity to weigh in and help companies with their protocols, that they have an opportunity to be heard when it comes to expanded access, all those things and more. And the other thing I just want to leave everyone with is the phrase "better together." There's far too few people that care about this disease in the world. We really can't be spending our energy fighting with each other. We've got to find a way to work together, and that's how we get to the cure in the fastest possible way. So thanks to all the panelists, and thanks especially to the MDA for putting this all together. I really enjoyed it.